On a freezing evening in Aberdeen, or amidst the roaring theater of Old Trafford, one man's word dictated the fate of multi-million-dollar empires. Sir Alex Ferguson spent 26 years building a ruthless, uncompromising dynasty at Manchester United, managing an estimated 180 elite athletes. Known for his tactical genius and a terrifying psychological edge, he was a dictator of discipline who famously asserted that no individual was ever larger than the collective institution. Yet, sitting in quiet reflection at 84 years old, the legendary manager did something that stunned the footballing world. He broke his own rule of absolute uniformity. Looking back across nearly 3 decades of dominance, Ferguson explicitly singled out a mere 7 players whom he truly respected above all others. This is not a list of his most decorated stars or his favorite personalities, but a precise, fact-driven autopsy of the psychological traits, work ethics, and fierce loyalties that could satisfy the highest standard in modern sports history. Who were the chosen 7 that breached the armor of football's most demanding patriarch? And what did they possess that dozens of global icons lacked? To understand why a declaration from an 84-year-old Sir Alex Ferguson carries such monumental weight, one must first dissect the psychological blueprint of his 26-year reign at Manchester United. Arriving at Old Trafford in November 1986, the Scottish manager inherited a fractured squad crippled by a toxic drinking culture and deeply entrenched complacency. Ferguson realized that to reverse a 26-year league title drought, he had to establish absolute psychological dominance. He famously asserted that the exact second a player became more important than the manager, the club was dead. This was not mere rhetoric. It was an active operating policy. Ferguson ran United like a benevolent dictatorship, utilizing tactical innovations alongside his legendary hairdryer treatment, a face-to-face, high-volume verbal assault designed to dismantle any creeping sense of arrogance or comfort. Over nearly 3 decades, global icons like David Beckham, Jaap Stam, and Ruud van Nistelrooy were instantly cast out the moment their individual egos threatened the equilibrium of the collective system. Ferguson demanded total emotional and physical submission to the badge, operating on the clinical belief that every single athlete was ultimately a replaceable cog in his massive winning machine. Praise was an incredibly rare commodity, deliberately rationed to keep players in a state of perpetual hunger and alertness. The dressing room was an intense, high-pressure environment where survival required absolute resilience. Yet, decades after retiring as the most decorated manager in football history, Ferguson's retrospective reflections revealed a profound paradox. While he spent a lifetime publicly maintaining that no individual was ever superior to the team, he quietly harbored a completely different tier of regard for a select few. Cliffhanger/open loop. What specific, undeniable psychological traits did the first of these 7 players possess that successfully breached this terrifying patriarchal armor, forcing history's most stubborn dictator to view them not as mere subordinates, but as genuine tactical equals? The foundational layer of Ferguson's ultimate respect was anchored in an unshakable, lifelong allegiance to his footballing philosophy, a rare trait personified by Ryan Giggs and Paul Scholes. As core graduates of the legendary class of 1992, these 2 midfielders did not just play for Manchester United. They became the literal manifestation of the club's identity. Giggs would go on to break the club's all-time appearance record with 963 matches, defying the biological limitations of modern sports through an obsessive lifestyle adjustment that included yoga and meticulous diet control. Scholes, conversely, operated as the quiet, unassuming genius of the midfield, possessing a passing vision that rivaled the greatest tactical minds in Europe. Ferguson deeply respected them because they completely rejected the seductive allure of modern, Hollywood celebrity branding. In an era where footballers were rapidly transforming into global fashion icons and corporate marketing entities, Scholes famously avoided the media spotlight entirely, opting to drive home to his family immediately after matches. This total absence of vanity offered Ferguson something priceless in the volatile world of elite sports: absolute predictability and unswerving alignment with his tactical mandates. They never demanded public adulation, nor did they use external transfer offers to leverage higher wages from the club. They simply showed up to training every single day, executed the manager's vision with mathematical precision, and stabilized the locker room during times of intense crisis. They were the cultural guardians of the club's DNA, passing down Ferguson's strict code of conduct to incoming generations of players. Cliffhanger/open loop. Yet, while homegrown loyalty and quiet professionalism secured a permanent place for local talent, Ferguson faced an entirely different psychological challenge when managing volatile, foreign superstars. How did a controversial French icon manage to command Ferguson's highest respect while consistently breaking almost every disciplinary rule the manager had ever established? The arrival of Eric Cantona in November 1992 is universally recognized by football historians as the definitive catalyst that ignited Sir Alex Ferguson's modern dynasty. Cantona was an enigmatic, fiercely independent force whose collar-up swagger single-handedly injected a sense of destiny into a young, anxious squad. By all conventional measures of Ferguson's rigid disciplinary code, Cantona's explosive temper, most notably demonstrated during his infamous 1995 kung fu kick against a hostile fan at Selhurst Park, should have resulted in immediate expulsion. Instead, Ferguson reacted with unprecedented psychological leniency. He flew to Paris to personally convince the Frenchman to stay, shielded him from an aggressive media circus, and built the entire tactical system around his unique creative vision. Ferguson recognized that Cantona's outward arrogance was not a toxic vanity, but a profound, resilient belief in his own capability. More importantly, Cantona backed his supreme confidence with a legendary work ethic. He was consistently the very first player to arrive at the training ground and the last to leave, spending hours practicing alone in the ring. This obsessive commitment set a massive example for the impressionable younger players like David Beckham and Gary Neville, who watched Cantona's dedication and instantly mirrored it. Ferguson respected Cantona because his rebellious nature was entirely purposeful. He was a revolutionary figure who transformed Manchester United from chronic underachievers into arrogant, back-to-back champions. He was the one player Ferguson willingly coddled, understanding that a creative genius required a delicate psychological touch rather than the blunt instrument of the hairdryer treatment. Cliffhanger/open loop. Cantona provided the artistic flame that ignited the empire, but as the club transitioned into an era of relentless European dominance, Ferguson required a completely different profile of player, a silent, unglamorous workhorse who achieved standard-setting perfection on a weekly basis without ever making a headline. While the global media routinely focused its attention on flamboyant goalscorers and eccentric personalities, Sir Alex Ferguson's deepest respect was rooted in defensive stability and quiet reliability. This professional ideal was perfectly epitomized by Dennis Irwin, the unassuming Irish fullback who quietly amassed 529 appearances for Manchester United. Irwin was so fundamentally dependable that Ferguson later claimed, without a single shred of hesitation, that if he were forced to pick his all-time career 11, Irwin would be the absolute first name written on the sheet. Irwin operated with an almost mechanical precision on the pitch. He was a master of defensive positioning, an elite reader of opposition attacking lanes, and a highly lethal deadball specialist who scored crucial penalties and free kicks throughout his decade-long tenure. What fascinated Ferguson most from a psychological standpoint was Irwin's complete lack of maintenance. He never complained about tactical adjustments, never created negative press distractions, and never suffered from dramatic fluctuations in his on-field form. In a high-stakes industry defined by emotional volatility and fragile athletic egos, Irwin provided a comforting predictability. He was a solid 7 out of 10 every single week, frequently delivering 9 out of 10 performances in the most critical Champions League matches. Ferguson viewed him as the ultimate professional blueprint, a player who required zero managerial energy or emotional reassurance to perform his duties flawlessly. Irwin's silence was his strength, allowing his clinical execution on the pitch to speak for itself. Cliffhanger/open loop. Having a squad filled with loyalists and silent perfectionists was crucial for domestic league campaigns. But to survive the brutal warfare of elite European knockout football, Ferguson needed something far more aggressive, a fierce, hyper-competitive extension of his own volatile personality on the pitch. No human being reflected Sir Alex Ferguson's ferocious, bordering on pathological, will to win quite like Roy Keane. As the iron-fisted captain of Manchester United during their historic 1999 treble-winning season, Keane was a terrifying, dominant force in the center of the pitch. He effectively governed the locker room with an intense psychological rigor that perfectly mirrored Ferguson's own high standards, demanding absolute accountability from every teammate. The absolute zenith of their complex relationship occurred during the 1999 Champions League semi-final against an elite Juventus side in Turin. Despite receiving a devastating yellow card early in the match that legally barred him from playing in the actual final, Keane put forth a monumental, completely selfless performance, driving his team forward from a 2-goal deficit to secure a historic victory. Ferguson later wrote that Keane's display was the most inspiring act of selflessness he had ever witnessed on a football pitch, stating it was an absolute honor to be associated with such a competitor. Although their partnership ultimately suffered a bitter public implosion in 2005 due to an explosive interview on MUTV where Keane brutally criticized the standards of his younger teammates, Ferguson's fundamental respect for Keane's contribution remained totally intact. Keane was the ultimate battlefield general who willingly sacrificed his own physical body and personal reputation to ensure that Ferguson's tactical blueprints were translated into pure silverware. He was the extension of the manager's rage and desire. Cliffhanger/open loop. Keane represented the absolute pinnacle of raw, aggressive, old-school leadership, but as the sport rapidly evolved into the multi-million-dollar corporate landscape of the 21st century, Ferguson was forced to manage a young, ambitious talent who would redefine the parameters of global superstardom. The final chapter of Ferguson's managerial evolution was defined by his masterful mentorship of Cristiano Ronaldo. Arriving at Old Trafford in 2003 as a raw, highly flamboyant 18-year-old winger obsessed with excessive stepovers, Ronaldo was frequently criticized by British pundits for a lack of substance. Ferguson, however, instantly recognized that beneath the flashy exterior lay an unprecedented, deeply focused work ethic that perfectly matched his own desires for global dominance. The manager stepped into a crucial father figure role, fiercely protecting the young Portuguese forward from severe public backlash following the controversial 2006 World Cup incident with Wayne Rooney. Under Ferguson's precise guidance, Ronaldo underwent a staggering physical and mental transformation. He converted his slender frame into a powerful athletic machine and spent hours practicing his shooting technique alone in the freezing Manchester rain long after his teammates had gone home. Ronaldo evolved into a clinical, hyper-efficient goal-scoring monster, winning his very first Ballon d'Or under Ferguson's tutelage in 2008. Even when Ronaldo eventually engineered a dream transfer to Real Madrid for a world record fee, the entire transition was handled with deep mutual respect via a gentleman's agreement, standing in stark contrast to the hostile departures of other stars. Ferguson respected Ronaldo because he was a factual testament to what happens when supreme natural talent is paired with an unparalleled, almost psychotic drive for continuous self-improvement. Cliffhanger/open loop. Ronaldo completed the core group of modern global icons who permanently etched their names into the club's trophy-laden history, but the final name on Ferguson's short list of ultimate respect belonged to an individual whose inclusion surprised casual fans, a player who relied on pure intellectual mastery. The final individual to command Sir Alex Ferguson's highest tier of respect was the brilliant, incredibly versatile English midfielder, Brian Robson. Long before the historic triumphs of the class of 1992 or the continental treble of 1999, Robson was the undisputed leader who single-handedly carried Manchester United through some of its most difficult, transitional years in the late 1980s. Affectionately known by the Old Trafford faithful as Captain Marvel, Robson was a fearless, dynamic box-to-box midfielder who routinely risked severe physical injury to secure victories for a developing squad. Ferguson deeply respected Robson's extraordinary tactical intelligence, his elite spatial awareness, and a rare ability to accurately read the game 3 steps ahead of anyone else on the pitch. Robson was the vital bridge between the old-school, highly physical era of English football and the hyper-professionalized, global commercial empire that Ferguson eventually constructed. He possessed an innate, masterly understanding of game tempo, knowing precisely when to slow the play down to frustrate opponents or when to inject a sudden burst of aggression to break defensive lines. For Ferguson, Robson represented the absolute blueprint of the complete, self-motivated footballer, mentally unbreakable, tactically flawless, and entirely dedicated to the supremacy of the badge. He did not need a manager to motivate him. His own internal standard was higher than any coach could ever enforce. Cliffhanger/open loop. These 7 distinct individuals, each vastly different in temperament, origin, and playing style, form the highly exclusive pantheon of a manager who spent a lifetime refusing to praise individuals. Now, decades after the trophies have been lifted, a broader question emerges about the nature of modern athletic leadership. Looking back from the quiet vantage point of 84 years old, Sir Alex Ferguson's deliberate selection of these 7 specific players, Giggs, Scholes, Cantona, Irwin, Keane, Ronaldo, and Robson, offers a profound, invaluable masterclass in sports psychology and human management. It exposes a fundamental truth about his legendary career. To earn the highest tier of respect from history's most successful football manager, elite athletic talent alone was never sufficient. Dozens of technically gifted world-class superstars passed through the gates of Carrington, yet they failed to breach Ferguson's emotional armor. The chosen 7 all shared a powerful, underlying denominator, an obsessive, entirely internal drive for perfection that required absolutely zero external motivation from the coaching staff. They were completely self-governing entities who actively raised the psychological and physical standards of every single person around them, effectively executing Ferguson's cultural blueprint on and off the pitch without supervision. Through these 7 specific men, Ferguson did not merely build a series of winning squads. He established an unshakable institutional standard of excellence that has proven incredibly difficult for modern, player-led football clubs to replicate in the current era. Their names remain deeply etched not just in the historical record books of global sport, but within the very psychological foundation of what defines a truly elite competitor. Now that you have explored the exact psychological traits and uncompromising work ethics that earned the ultimate respect of Sir Alex Ferguson, how do you think his rigid, dictatorial style of management would fare in today's modern era of massive player power, hypersensitive egos, and nonstop social media branding?